Everyone, welcome to our third Symposia session, defining, aligning, measuring success with Tim Airgood. We also have with us today Tony Santiago and Stephanie Gilmartin. Stephanie, this is her first time joining us. She is an executive tax consultant at TaxTalent and has been here for almost 20 years. Hi everyone, welcome to our third Symposia session, defining, aligning, and measuring success with Tim Airgood. We also have with us today Tony Santiago and Stephanie Gilmartin. This is Stephanie's first time joining us. She is an executive tax consultant at TaxTalent and has been with us for almost 20 years now. She'll be here to help answer questions at the end as well. I can't hear you, Tim.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. I'm not sure why I can't go through the computer this time, but that's okay. And I've got the PowerPoint up.
You just got to share your screen.
What's that?
You just have to share your screen.
Yep.
Can't see it yet.
There we go. How's that?
Oh, I can see it.
There?
Yep. Good. So I'll just do a quick intro and then hand it off to Tony just for a second, and then we'll get started with the presentation.
Okay.
Yep. Since it's Stephanie's first time, I'm just going to give a really quick background on her. Just one sentence in my intro. Yep.
And Shannon, can I assume that everybody has the slides, like they're looking at them, or do you think are people calling in and not having the slides in front of them?
I think from what I've seen, most people have been actually like on their computer looking. So I think they're able to see them. I always send the slide deck to them afterwards so they have it in their hands on the recording as well.
Okay. I might ask them just in case I need to like read some of the slides or anything like that. Explain what's on them.
Yeah. I know a few people have emailed me saying one person's on jury duty, someone was traveling for work, and then another person had another meeting, I think, come up.
Okay.
But it's always hard in the summer. Everyone's traveling and got different things going on.
Yep.
Should have good attendance, though.
And I'm happy to.
Do you have any more? Oh, go ahead.
I'd be happy to follow up with people if they were interested. I mean, this stuff is like incredible to me.
Definitely. I'm sure many people take you up on that. So I know they did with Tim, so I'm sure they will.
Should I, let's see, as part of the intro, are you going to give any of my background, or should I give a little bit of kind of what I've done, or?
Yeah, if you want to give a quick recap of your background. I know we kind of introduced you once at the last session, but we can do that again. Do you want me to do that?
Or, I guess what I was thinking was maybe, I ought to give them a little bit on what companies I've been with and stuff like that, just like.
Oh, yeah, I think that'd be good.
Credibility standpoint and stuff like that, try to help them understand that why I'm talking about this stuff, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, so do you want to do that? I'll do my intro, give it to Tony real quick, and then hand it to you to do that, and then get started.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. I'm just gonna put the dial-in information in the chat just in case anyone needs it. I know last time people asked for it. Whoops. Hello. I don't know if she can hear me yet. Oh, hey, Stephanie.
Hello, how are you all?
Good. How are you?
Good. Good.
I'm not sure I can see the number of participants here. Shannon, how are we doing?
We're at 10 right now.
Okay.
Yeah, they're trickling in now. We're up to 14. We'll give everyone a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. Just a quick reminder before we get started, when you're not speaking, please put your mic on mute because it will highlight your box if there's any kind of background noise. All right, we'll get started and I'll record it for everyone who's just getting in now. So welcome everyone to our third Symposia session, Defining, Aligning, and Measuring Success with Tim Airgood. We also have with us Tony Santiago and Stephanie Gilmartin. This is Stephanie's first time joining us. She is an executive tax consultant at TaxSearch, and she's been with us for almost 20 years. So on that note, I'll hand it off to you, Tony.
Actually, Stephanie will have her 20th anniversary this year, so we're glad to have her on the team, and she's been an integral part of the company's progress. I just want to thank everybody again for taking the time. I know we're all busy. We'll try to make this as productive as possible. I think Tim's done a really good job in consolidating in a concise manner some critical points that I think will be of value to you. Other than that, I think that the participation on the forum's gotten better. I want us to keep kind of dialoguing there as much as possible, bringing up topics, even if not on target to the session that was just done, but obviously any follow-up questions to the sessions, please feel free to bring those to the forum as well. Other than that, I will turn it over to Tim and allow him to get started here. Tim, it's all you.
Thanks, Tony. First of all, is there anybody that's not seeing the slides? If you can just mention it, and that way I'll describe what's in the slides if you can't see them. Okay, sounds like everybody's got slides. So just real quick background. I spent about 30 years in the tax field. I started out with Ernst & Young, time with Ford Motor Company, and I finished my career at United Technologies as the Vice President of International Tax, responsible for all the international tax planning at UTC. And in that role, I had about 35 reports in 8 or 9 different countries. So while I've not had the #1 position, I've worked very closely and had some significant management and leadership experience here. And so that's kind of what I bring into this presentation and discussion. So to begin with, in session 1, Mike talked to us about key metrics to success, making sure that we've defined those and agreed them. those metrics with the key stakeholders. We also talked about the personal assessment and the functional and specialty tax areas. In session 2, Mike talked about the tax department assessment, focusing on the objectives, capabilities, and the organization. And then we also spent some time on financial reporting, since this is such a critical element, at least especially within public companies. It seems as though all the risk and everything kind of comes together in the provision. So today we're really going to focus, it'll be kind of an interesting discussion, I hope, because we're going to focus more on non-tax or broader than tax kind of discussions. We're not going to talk about tax a lot, but more probably around leadership and effectiveness skills that really support success, or at least from my perspective, a perspective, support the success in these areas in the midst of the complexity and the change that you're all experiencing. So, you know, as we talked about the key metrics, important to define them, align them, but the problem is then the world starts changing on us immediately, right? And these metrics they sort of need to be dynamic here, and you may not get relief. People may not change the metrics, but you certainly, there's an opportunity for discussion around probably most of what we're seeing right now in the legislative, regulatory area, and even specific facts. And, you know, we listed personnel changes here. At one point in my career, we changed the CEO, CFO, and VP of tax within probably 6 months or something. Impact on metrics and whether those metrics are still viable and all that kind of stuff. So as we go into this, again, you know, I think we're not really talking tax so much today as much as leadership. And I worked for a really great boss at one point, and he started the first discussion I had with him with 3 C's, and I sort of summarized it down to 1, and I think that 1 C is credibility. And a lot of what we're going to talk about, in my opinion, supports credibility. And the more credibility that you establish with your key stakeholders and things like that, I think the more manageable your life becomes and the interactions with those people. Close behind credibility, I think, is the culture that you establish within your groups, and that's going to be another kind of critical component. So I think I would kind of bring those to the top for you to maybe think about as we walk through these. So this is the outline that we're going to talk about. The factors on this page may be a little bit less obvious. You know, they're non-technical kind of factors. And again, the culture that you define, I think, will be critical to your success, because no longer can you do this all on your own, and it's going to be very important to have a team that's rising with you. So what we're going to do is one slide pretty much on each of these topics, or maybe a couple slides on some of them, but we'll just jump right in here. So with respect to the ongoing alignment of the company objectives, you know, not only is it important to define and agree those metrics up front, as Mike talked about, but then on an ongoing basis, continuously reviewing those metrics. And I think the other component of this is effective communication and collaboration with key stakeholders is so important as the internal and external factors change around you. In addition, you know, you might think about what other initiatives are going to require your support and participation or impact your processes and workflows, or your metrics. And down below, the 4th bullet point gives us some examples. So Treasury comes to you with some cash needs that were not anticipated when those metrics were agreed. Maybe there's an M&A project that people hadn't contemplated that's big enough to impact some of the things that you've discussed. As it's just getting harder and harder to hit rate objectives, you know, is the risk tolerance or profile of the company changing? And restructurings, all kinds of things can be going on out there that can impact those metrics that you've agreed. So you might also then think about who and what processes can help you stay plugged in so that you can stay ahead of and help managing these changes. And I think a critical point in my mind is, you know, if you're always fighting fires, you can never get ahead. and you can never really create what you want to be out there. So it's incredibly valuable to find, even outlying processes. I remember one time there was an HR initiative that we normally wouldn't have had some had interface with, but it actually had some rate impact, and we were made aware of that because of sort of the network that we had created. One of those things, for example, the advisors, it was clear to them that if the firm was working on other projects in the company that were non-tax related, they sort of had a responsibility to communicate that back so that we could have one flow of information that helped us sort of give us a heads up out that wasn't necessarily relying on our internal processes, understanding those key relationships, treasury, ops, HR, and then also I think educating people along the way as to, a lot of times HR people or other functions don't really understand why would tax care about this, and they may go off. So I think in building those, understanding what could affect you and building those relationships, educating people to make sure that you can stay ahead of the curve on these things is very helpful and important. I think ethics, I've been fortunate. Every company that I've worked for has had very strong ethics policies, and it made it very easy to kind of stay within the boundaries and stuff. But I think this is an area that can be very, you really got to be careful because there's so much gray here. And examples that kind of came to mind, I can remember M&A projects where, maybe a buyer or a seller may want to use structures that appeared to be probably more closer to tax avoidance and tax planning, and it made us uncomfortable. And other situations that I remember where, there may be a legal requirement in the country, but the legal requirement is very, very complicated or adverse, and the local practice was something different. And even talking to advisors, they may tell you local practice is this, but the legal requirement is something different. And those are kind of situations that, I was very fortunate if your company has an ethics program or structure like an ombudsman program or something like that, I found that to be incredibly helpful because I never wanted to sort of be left out on my own trying to make these kind of decisions, just because the impact to the company can be tremendous, and to you personally, I think. And then in those situations where the company may not have an ethics structure or something, you can still be proactive and pull them forward.
Sorry.
Shannon, are you getting the buzz?
Yeah, I'm getting this.
I will pause when that happens because I probably can't be heard over it. So if the company doesn't have an ethics structure, like an ombudsman program or something like that, I'd highly recommend pulling these issues forward and involving the appropriate stakeholders. And I think the key point here is it can be incredibly difficult to determine whether you want to document an issue, and if so, how you're going to document that, just to kind of keep the company safe as you're going through these kind of questions. So another one, I think, and again, back to the credibility point, it seems to me that it's a good way to think about this is always being a good steward of the company's resources. And to me, the simple way of thinking about this is, what would I be doing if this were my money, if these were the risks, my own risks that I were managing? And in addition, then, I think the key points of are activities being prioritized and properly and focused on, are risks appropriately identified, understood, managed, and communicated, and is the team working their full potential? And then if I go back up, it's sort of amazing to me on the prioritization focus. I suspect this group is probably very good at this, but it's amazing to me how complicated this is for some people. And, questions that you might ask yourself, is the group working on the right things? Are processes in place to ensure that your opportunities are being identified? And are activities appropriately prioritized? I can remember Stephen Covey in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People talks about Cube with two axes. One is urgent, not urgent. The other is important, not important. And he talks about how it's important to allocate time to the important and not urgent functions. We'll talk about this a little bit later, or activities. And just as an illustration, at one point I was trying to get my hands around what a group was doing. And I asked them, can you take your activities and kind of list them out and sort of let me know, do you view these as urgent, important, not urgent, important? How do you in those four quadrants, how would you prioritize it or characterize your activities? And it was surprising to me that there were several that came back that actually acknowledged that they were unimportant and not urgent. And it's like, how can you just can't allocate time to that with all the time pressures and all the demands on our time. So I think recognizing that this is not necessarily easy for a lot of people, and the question then of how you kind of keep the team focused and things like that. And again, it's pretty tough to think about losing 10 hours or 50 hours because somebody kind of went a different direction or something like that, and you weren't aware of it. I think the risk point, that's probably fairly clear. And the other one I think that really became much more fascinating to me as I matured, got older, got more experience is this point on is the team working to the full potential. And there's a number of concepts out there related to leadership and empowerment and things like that. A lot of good published material, and I would highly encourage you, to think outside the box maybe a little bit from what you've experienced in your development and what other people may have been, at least in my experience, coming up through the tax culture, it's more focused on the technical, and hopefully you figure out some of these things. But there's a great book out there that some of these concepts are being taken out of, called Leading at a Higher Level by the Ken Blanchard companies. And we actually did some work with them on some leadership training. And one of the concepts that was highlighted for me was this idea of self-leadership. And do you have a culture where people are challenging assumed constraints? Are they leveraging their points of power, their relationships, their knowledge, their insights, and things like that? And are they collaborating for success? Is it an environment of collaboration where they're tapping into each other and others? Is there the empowerment culture? Again, the Ken Blanchard, the book will talk to you about sharing information, replacing hierarchy with self-directed individuals, creating autonomy through boundaries, things like that, to let people really kind of get out of their way and let them work to their full potential. And we did a lot of work around this. And just another real quick story, I will keep close track on time here, but we had a structure where I was responsible. I had some 5 or 6 direct reports, and then we had a level of managers. And at the beginning, the structure worked pretty much where the directors directed managers. They would say, go do this, I need this, that kind of work. And when we started to implement some of these concepts and things, we actually flipped the model around, and the managers began running projects. The directors were there more for support. And we saw, in my view, in a fairly short time, like a year, an amazing turnaround between sort of our ability to leverage the experience of people that we brought in, I would say I want to use the word happiness. It's probably not the right word, but I mean, people were much more fulfilled coming in their job, knowing that they were in charge of sort of what was going on and things like that, as opposed to being told what to do. So, and then the last concept here that I'll share, this has been through some coach training, but are people bringing their full energy to work? Are they coming in there and are they sort of tolerating the situation, or are they really excited to be there and working to a level of energy that they're hitting on all cylinders as opposed to half of them? So again, these are concepts. What I'm trying to do is just share things for you to think about that you may or may not have been introduced to, but I think can be incredibly powerful in your ongoing success. And Stephanie, I think you guys are doing some work around this point on the full energy to work and some mentoring and things like that. I don't know, any comments you want to add here?
Yeah, if you're not aware, we do have a really strong mentoring program on our TaxTalent side. You can sign up to be a mentor, which is greatly needed today. A lot of kids out there, a lot of young tax professionals are looking for mentors in a variety of ways. It could be from a leadership standpoint, technical standpoint. You can also sign up for a mentor if there's a particular area that you're really needing some help with. You can sign up to be a mentor. So it's really a great program, and it's the only one like it out there that we know of for tax professionals. So it's been very, very effective for a lot of tax people.
So again, what we're talking about here, from my perspective, is there's that book out there called Good to Great. To me, this is great to awesome. Like where you're beyond a really good tax manager, tax leader. You're a leader. So yeah, I'm not quite sure the best way to do this. I think I'm just going to keep rolling. I'll pause for a second. Any questions or comments at this point? But then I'll just jump right back in, and we can save time at the end if you want to talk, Peg, anything to come back to. Anything so far?
Jim, this is Tony. I got a question for you. When you went through the transition of empowering the team, because, did you find any resistance for some people who didn't want to take responsibility, who really weren't stepping up? Did you see there were some people who just didn't want that responsibility and embrace that opportunity was thrown at them? Was it pretty much 100% everybody came along?
No, you're absolutely right, Tony. And it was really both ends of the spectrum. When from our experience, when you mention empowerment, that could mean, no thanks, I'm not interested. Just tell me what you want me to do. The other end of the spectrum is, wait a second, you're telling me that you're telling me what to do. That's not right. You're not being consistent with this concept of empowerment. So defining empowerment and what this means as you're going through this transition is incredibly important. And I think there's another point that I'm going to touch on somewhere along the line about change management that I think is another incredibly important component that I became aware of far too late in my 30 years.
Did you see some people leave because of the change that just didn't embrace it or fizzle out over time? And did you see other people, directors, who also resisted it as well when they were used to being the traditional, here's what you guys are going to do versus flipping the model? How did that go as well?
I would say I don't believe anybody left because of this. I think there was a lot of confusion and a lot of lack of clarity as, okay, what's my job now and things like that. But what it required was just constant communication and even what I considered basic principles as to why we were undertaking this. It had to be reinforced up and down the organization on a constant basis. Okay. And I guess one thing, and I'd seen a post out there on how do you think about discussing effectiveness of planning and things like that. And we did some tremendous work around processes in the planning area at UTC. And I'm more than happy to share that. But the other thing in terms of this empowerment, just a little bit more on that, what the processes also supported that we didn't realize when we put them in place was it really was a huge enabler for empowerment. Because when you talk about providing boundaries, what the process did, and if you're familiar with Six Sigma or those kind of things, you have milestone touch points. And what the process let us do was say, okay, we're at touch point milestone 1. Here's the things that we know have to be done between 1 and 2. You based on your experience and things like that, you're free to sort of run on your own, and you can keep us advised as you're moving forward, or if you run into problems, or if you see risks and things like that. But we really don't have to come back together until we get to the defined second touch point. And that was a huge benefit to let people sort of work on their own and in this empowerment kind of concept.
Tim, I want to highly encourage the participants. As most of you know, I've touched on the base with a lot of companies in 30 years, but applying the Six Sigma or TQM, or what you guys call the ACE system, to a tax planning processes and systems, you guys were one of the few that I ever saw doing it and successfully doing it. And every time senior candidates interviewed there was always a level of, wow, that's pretty impressive. And I know it has some major benefits for the company, the finance group, and the shareholders. But I highly encourage you guys to reach out to Tim and on the forum, post any questions on that, or give him a call, because I think it's something that very few departments are using effectively. And I think it's the wave of where the future will go with some of these tax planning strategies.
Hey, Tim, this is Jason Helsing. Yeah, I had heard that UTC actually had embedded in their planning group non-tax people that were project managers. Is that true?
That's correct.
See, I've always advocated for that, and I've had success getting like a tax person trained to do that, but never actually seen a company do that. And I think with your guys' size, I mean, that had to be an amazing relief for these tax people, that a lot of them are not good project managers. But if you have that project manager example there every day, you know, they're going to learn a lot, and obviously it's going to take a lot of weight off them. So I've been extremely impressed with that.
That is absolutely correct. At one point we had three or four non-tax project managers. There are pros and cons ranging from, you know, technical insights, which, you know, I still don't believe are that important because they're focused on the process as opposed to technical issues. But there is some level of understanding that's helpful. You know, so at one end of the spectrum, at the other end of the spectrum, depending on what those people want from their own career development, that can be a bit of a challenge too, as to where they go within a tax department stuff. But, you know, as Tony mentioned, you know, it's probably, you know, I don't know, I don't like to brag, but I mean, it's probably I feel like one of my greater accomplishments in my career, what we did with the tax planning processes there. And if any of you guys want to follow up on it, probably we could spend an hour or hours probably on that too. So I'm happy to go any way if you want to contact me or anything.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Tim, it's Eric Rosenfeld. Hopefully, I've been fighting with my mute button here a little bit. So are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. The question I had kind of went back to the first slide. Maybe you'll come back to it in the effective collaboration and communication, but I'm curious on what you found between, in your experience, different companies, a lot of times then at UTC as well. What was the most effective means of communication and collaboration with the other functions? And, you know, you can set up regular meetings, and sometimes that can become burdensome and unproductive, but, you know, how did you balance that, and what were the best processes that you put in place? And it sounds like maybe some of it came into play too with what you just mentioned on the tax planning area and having those project managers involved.
Yeah, so we're going to touch on communication and collaboration on a couple different slides, but I'm going to your point, there's a group that was incredibly helpful, and we refer to it as it was kind of a finance working group, and it was a representative from tax, accounting, legal, and treasury. And that group was sort of, you know, when you had a project or something that you needed to sort of the cross-functional alignment and things like that, that was a place you could go among those people, down, you know, level from the VP position and things like that, where a lot of good stuff could get done and a lot of good collaboration and coordination through that. Also then built into the processes, you know, as there were standard touch points for when accounting would be brought in, when treasury would be brought in, when legal would be brought in, all that kind of stuff. So it was fairly clear, and it helped the communication and alignment incredibly well, because people knew what to expect at what point in the projects and things like that. I think, you know, but at the same time, there were still challenges outside of all that. You know, you're constantly working with different business groups and things like that, and you know, trying to create that alignment and all that kind of stuff is a challenge. But I agree with your point that regularly scheduled meetings, and I got to be a little careful not to go too far. I get really excited about this stuff because I think it's so incredibly powerful. But regular scheduled meetings are like, to me, they're like the life cycle of a team. You put everybody together, they're excited. After a while, things start not going so well. They get frustrated with each other. Then things start clicking, it gets done, and next thing you know, the team's over, it's got to disband. And somewhere in there, it's easy to lose enthusiasm. And regular meetings are a similar kind of thing. And to me, you know, it's like, how do you pump new life into it every now and then? Maybe you change up the agenda, maybe you change up the participants, maybe you bring different people, you know, like with different presentations or expertise. But I think that's a real challenge there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I never thought about it like this, and so this, you know, like you guys are all top of your field and stuff like that, but it's almost like at some points you got to be a little bit of an entertainer through all this, right? Okay, so maybe we'll move on to, I guess, delivering on the expectations and results on a sustainable basis. So, you know, I think we're all aware this is if you don't do this, you probably don't have a chance to talk about the other things that we're talking about. But, you know, over the years, I think what came critically clear to me was, you know, we all know that excuses usually don't count. And what I learned over the years was there's a subtle difference between excuses and explanations. So I tried to avoid both. And I think, you know, a couple of key points here. From the beginning, you know, be careful that you're not letting unrealistic goals be pushed onto your team, and make sure that you're setting them up for success. So as management is talking to you about your metrics and objectives, are they realistic? And if they're not, I'd highly encourage you to keep talking and keep pushing back. Takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of patience, but I think it's incredibly important not to lay out there something that is going to be a likely failure, or something less than a great success. And at the same time, then, being clear on what you need. And, you know, an example of this. So I can remember over the years, like numbers of meetings where trying to get a little bit of clarity on some projects and things, I would ask the question, what's most important to us, rate or cash repatriation? And it would not be unusual that somebody in a very important position would say both, thank you. And everybody in the room would normally laugh and get a kick out of that. And I said, well, okay, but you need to understand that it's not both. Even, you know, unless you have high tax pools or something like that where you can access cash on a fairly straightforward basis. You know, even more sophisticated transactions or something like that you can get a good opinion on, that means, what, 7 out of 10 times you might win? But there's risk in all of that, and that risk, in my mind, what I was trying to keep taking them back to was it's a rate issue, and you may not see it today, but it's going to hang out there for you, and you got to take it into consideration in your risk portfolio. So, you know, I think those are difficult discussions because they don't necessarily want to hear it, but you know, they do get it. And I think, again, you know, to set your team up for success is so critical. And then I think another question that's important is how sustainable are the objectives or benefits? And, you know, is the company targeting a smoothed out rate over a period of years? Is it want you to go out and sort of everything you can any given year and let the rate bop around and things like that? And obviously not to the point of managing the rate, but, you know, how you prioritize and what you work on and implement can impact what's going on there. So I think, you know, you might be looking at a set of facts and you looks like things are pretty good for the next 2 years. I was always talking about years 3 and 4. Usually we had very few discussions about current year projects. they were too complicated. You were either going forward or you weren't, and that was really the implementation part. But the dialogue about what's out there took up a lot of our time in the future. And then ongoing communication of the process and substantive risks was always incredibly valuable. I never wanted my VP or the CFO to sort of lose sight that, yeah, we're doing a lot of great stuff, but there's substantive risks here, but there's also process risks. If you don't cross the T, dot the I, and quite honestly, that's one of the reasons that we had all of that we built the processes that we did to try to minimize that process and substantive risk. And the way I like to talk about it was, you get a should opinion, you may be at 7 out of 10. It only gets worse from there if you talk about not crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and that usually got the attention. And then finally, when the world starts changing, then I think what I would suggest and what I found frustrating and hopeful, communicate as soon as possible. Problems don't get better with age, and if you're not sort of in there letting people, your key stakeholders know, somebody else is probably going to be in there. And it was always important to me that they got sort of my version first, and that's not spin. That's my version of the truth. I recognize it's my version of truth, but I didn't want to have to go in later and try to counter something that somebody from a different function has already told them or something like that. Okay, so I'm just going to keep rolling here. So the question of collaboration came up. I think I summarize our success in one word: credibility. Everything we're doing is either building credibility or detracting from credibility. The kind of culture we build around this is incredibly important in that credibility. I think collaboration and communication are probably the two other absolutely critical elements. Over the years, I came to believe that 85%, at least 85% of all the problems, and I'm not just talking about tax problems, have already been addressed by someone, and maybe overstated by 0.1%, but 100% of these problems could be resolved with effective collaboration. And the collaboration helps you challenge your thoughts and permits you tapping into other people's knowledge, and making sure that your advisors and others that will be given input to your CFO and other decision makers are on the same page is unbelievably valuable to reduce the confusion and the time spent, trying to reconcile after the messages have already taken place and things like that. So you might think about who are your key collaborators, who should they be, and really thinking hard about what collaboration looks like. This is, and again, there's just so much power in involving others. So this assumes that you all have common objectives. That's the beginning point. And I would say, I was never really afraid when if something went wrong, problems arose. I was never really concerned, to a dramatic level, because the team that I had around me was so strong, and the collaborative process or problem-solving process that we had was part of our fabric. And that collaboration included people from the firms, obviously internal people, tax, non-tax, and it was not unusual for people from different firms to be in meetings, like when we got up against the tough ones, because my view was it's not about PwC and Ernst & Young and Deloitte, it's about UTC. And if I needed the two specific people from different firms on a problem that we were working on, or my team needed that, that's what we did. And it worked phenomenally well. And again, this collaborative approach becomes an incredibly important part of the culture that you build or don't build as well here. We could talk about that piece for a long, long time too. So, so the communication, I think that, I summarize effective communication, being proactive. Again, problems don't get better with time. I don't want somebody else telling my story. And with the credibility, you can develop those relationships where you can go and talk to the VP or CFO, and you can say, we may have a problem. I don't want you to get too concerned about it, but this is what we're doing related to it. If it goes the wrong way, it could be a big problem, you know, those kind of things. And they're like, perfect, fine, let me know how it goes. And I think, you know, having those kind of relationships was so incredibly important and valuable to us. Being clear on that communication, you know, I didn't, early on in my career, I would say things and I would hope that decision makers understood what I was saying, and trying to communicate. It became clear to me fairly quickly that, you know what, you just got to tell them. They're all big people, and it may be bad news, it may be hard news or whatever, but you got to be crystal clear, because you can't expect them to interpret what you're saying here. Being concise, I was always trying to be very respectful of people's times. You know, you think about what the CFO's got going on, you know, all the different areas and things like that. I was always trying to be respectful of their time, give them what they needed to know, but not take up any more of their time than I needed. And then finally, you know, this one was shared with me early on in my career, and I think it was kind of what carried me through, and no surprises. And it's like, I don't want surprises from somebody else's communications. I don't want something popping on us that we hadn't at least been aware of, you know, that was a risk and things like that. So I think that's a really, really valuable one. And communication, I think the last thing I would say here is it's a 360 process. It's not just to the people that you report to, it's to your teams and to the people, to your peers and things like that too. And all of these principles, I think, apply on a 360 basis. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about something else that's like very near and dear to me. And, you know, obviously my experience was my experience, it's not yours. But this was very enlightening to me in the last probably 3 or 4 years of my career. I wish I would have known it was. There's a song, I wish I would have known then what I know now, or when I was younger or something like that. This is one of those. So we're going to talk a page on strategic leadership and then on operational leadership. And strategic leadership, you know, the way I'm talking about it is sort of how you're going to frame up the above issues and factors and things like that. You know, how are you going to think about your teams? How are you going to think about how your work gets performed and things like that? Operational leadership is more, how are you going to execute? And what came clear to me that I wish I would have understood is that it's not one or the other, but it's both. And I was very good on the strategic side. I was very, very good on the strategic side. On the operational side, I deferred far too much and hoped that people would take care of the operational leadership part. And I was fortunate that for many, many years throughout my career, off and on and things like that, there were, you know, people with me that actually stepped up and did that and made it very easy for me. But it also took me off, sort of my focus off of it. And I didn't realize the importance where there was a gap there that I wasn't addressing. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper on these next pages. So when I'm talking about strategic leadership in this context, I'm not talking about tax technical strategic leadership. I'm not talking about where's the pools of cash, where's the foreign tax credit sitting, where's the E&P pools, where's the, you know, what kind of technology do we need to apply, how are we going to take care of the provision changes and things like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the non-technical, and you could take tax out of that one, non-technical strategic leadership. So here's some things to think about. And throughout this entire presentation, I just want to acknowledge this. These are based on my experience. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to share 30 years of learning with you, but I also recognize it's my experience, and it may be valid, it may not be valid to you, but things to think about. So, you know, have you asked yourself, what's your leadership philosophy? Are you a directing leader? Do you think of yourself as a servant leader? There's a whole sort of thought process out there on servant leadership. You know, I'm here to support the people that work for me, as opposed to they're here to serve me. And, you know, thinking about what your leadership philosophy is there and why, and what you want it to be, can be incredibly valuable. And I think we don't really spend, oftentimes people don't spend a lot of time on this. You know, how do you want to develop your people? How important that is? How important is that to you, and how are you going to do that? Second one, you know, how do you align your team, prioritize, and make decisions? I found that, you know, over the years, I've seen numbers of vision statements and mission statements and things like that, and usually, you know, 90% of the time they were put together and they got lost and nobody ever looked at it again. I did see it in my last my time at UTC. In the last part, we used this a lot, and it was incredibly effective. It was developed by our entire group. It included, again, this was from leading at a higher level. I gained so much from that book. You know, what's your purpose? Why is this special? What's your picture of the future? And what are your 3 or 4 values for the group that you in rank priority, so that if you get up against something where you've got some
seminars that include
that. Are you going to solve that?
So John came by to talk to us about, sorry, hold on, finish my mascara. Hopefully you're not offended. John came by to talk to us about
somebody
provide an explanation.
Yeah, let me.
Yeah, we need maybe somebody to mute.
Is she muted herself?
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So, you know, how do you think about your team? The vision statements can be incredibly valuable, done right and lived. How do you think about team dynamics, cultures, norms, accountability, things like that? And there's lots of thoughts out there to help you with these. How do you identify how do you identify and project trends to determine what you need to be working on today that's going to be so you're prepared for the future? And I referred to this before, leading change. So there's a body of thought out there on change management that, again, I wish I would have known this a long time ago. And, you know, it's something I'd like to experiment more with. But, you know, as an example, we had some project management software, and it worked really well for us. We sort of outgrew it, so we wanted to upgrade. We spent a reasonable amount of money, and, you know, it was such a good idea to me. It's like, you know, this is like a no-brainer, so let's just go do it. So, you know, this is one of those where, okay, folks, we're going to implement new project management software. I need you to sort of get on board, and there will be training, and we'll figure it all out. And it was, I'm not going to say it was a disaster, but it was much, much more complicated than it needed to be, because I didn't respect that there, you know, I had a whole bunch of people that are different levels of their acceptance, their understanding. So, you know, where are we today? Why are we doing this? What's in it for me? You know, what's in it for the company? And taking time to more thoughtfully think about these changes and address people's concerns and things like that, I think could take a tremendous amount of noise out of the change processes, stuff like that. So, you know, another one for you to think about. And again, on any of this stuff, if you want to come back, I'm not going to hold myself out as an expert or anything like that, but I'm happy to talk to you about in more detail what this is about. So communication, again, clear and transparent. A couple of very important statements that I've learned through some of this last training. In the absence of information, people will make it up. So if you don't give them sort of the full picture, they'll finish it for you. And that can be incredibly disruptive. You know, all the hallway chatter and things that you know, they perceive. Boy, I've got stories I could go on this one, but anyway, you know, I think keeping that in mind. So the more information you share, the better off you are normally. And then also, if it's important, say it over and over and over. And you know, there were certain things. There was one objective that we had, I remember, and every time we would start a meeting, I would state that objective. And I think it's a valid and critical point that people just need to be reminded constantly in the process of changes and things like that. And then again, we've talked about this, but as things change, communicate. You know, another one that I might challenge you to think about: focus on key decisions, key risks, ensuring progress, obtaining resources, and clearing roadblocks as part of your responsibility. You know, I think I'm not exactly sure where everybody's at in their development, but certainly it can be a very difficult thing to let go of the activities that made us successful. And, you know, there were probably 2 or 3 step changes in my career where I sort of had to let go of something. And as that progressed and I became more a leader in a management role, I had to quit doing the tax planning and things like that. And these are some of the critical elements that I think you might want to think about, you know. And obviously you're going to have your own views on this, but again, just some thoughts. And then I love this saying, the best way to predict the future is to make it. And I think that, so one more quick story. When BEPS was coming on, we had a whole lot of things coming at us, and there were demands coming from every direction. So we stepped back and did a SWOT analysis. This is a 4-quadrant thing: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we kind of went through and completed the SWOT analysis, and what came incredibly clear to me was that there's a lot more in your control, and there's a lot more that you can actually influence than what you may believe. And that kind of goes back to that self-leadership challenges and constraints. And I think it's amazing how much influence you actually have in your roles. And the question is whether you exercise it and how you want to exercise it. So those are some thoughts on the strategic leadership. On the operational leadership side, again, this was a whole for me. This is making sure that people have the tools and the skills they need, and the proper management styles being applied to them. Assessing their development level with respect to specific tasks, providing the appropriate direction and support. In other words, not over-managing and not under-managing them, but give them what they need. And then SMART goals. Again, this is one that, you know, over my career, there's been lots of discussion about SMART goals, and I roll my eyes and say, come on, do we really need this? Let's move. And it did come clear to me later that sometimes the slow way is the fast way. And depending on where somebody's at in their development, you know, early on, especially with respect to new tasks, these SMART goals could be incredibly valuable. Obviously, you know, if I would have gone into my boss and said, I'd like to establish some SMART goals to make sure I stay on track, I don't think I would have had a job much longer. But, you know, so it depends where you're at in the level and sort of in your development, stuff like that. But I do think that there is a role here probably within the groups. So this slide now gives you some examples. And again, and I don't work for Blanchard. I'm not selling anything, but I do believe in a lot of things I read in this book. And this is an example of situational leadership 2, which is a model that they use to think about this operational management. So the example here is somebody learning to ride a bike. In the lower right-hand corner is somebody's first learning to ride a bike. They're all excited, they're really excited, but they have no idea what they're doing. You need to teach, you need to demonstrate, you need to lay out a step-by-step plan, maybe the SMART goals, something like that, watch them closely. Then you move up to the upper right-hand quadrant. And at this point, you know, they're falling, they're getting banged up, and they're sitting there thinking, you know, I don't even know why they invented a bicycle. I don't want to do this. So that's referred to as a disillusioned learner. And here you need to continue to give them some direction and make sure that everything's going, that they're practicing as best as they can. But you're starting to move away from, you know, complete direction. A little more back and forth on it. You give them some support, so as they're developing, they're starting to feel, you know, you want to give them some confidence. And then they move into the upper left-hand corner. Now they actually know how to ride the bike, but they're scared to death because they've had too many accidents, too many bangs, bumps and bangs. So at this point, what they need from you is their support. They don't need you to tell them how to ride the bike. They need you to tell them that they're doing a great job and encourage them and praise them. And then finally, the 4th level of development is the riding, you know, they're autonomous. And these are the people in your group that they just know what needs to be done, and you can let them run and they'll get it done for you. So the point of this is that people go through these development phases, and they encourage you to think about it on a task-by-task basis. because I may be really good at planning and they ask me to do tax return, I haven't got a clue or something like that. Well, you know, my experience as a tax planner doesn't really help me right now. And then the key point though is applying the correct or the most appropriate management strategy to each of these development phases so that you're matching your management style with their development needs. And that's getting you back to not over managing, not under managing, but trying to provide them what they need to be successful. I'm going to go through the last slide here, and we got one more slide. And I know I've thrown a ton of stuff at you, but I'm going to finish it up with this last slide, and then we can take a few minutes here if we want. Okay, so we threw budgeting in here, and you know, budgeting when I was younger was a painful exercise, and it was like roll your eyes. It's kind of like when I was younger, performance reviews was a painful exercise, but got over all that. And what I come to realize is budgeting is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to tell your story and really to help people understand what you're doing, why, where the value is. In some cases, I would put together graphs that explained how much money we spent and what the payback was on those things or on those activities. I would talk about the amount of risk that we're managing. I would talk about how we've used processes to make sure that we're doing this as efficient and effectively as we possibly can. Always room for improvement, though. And just basically an opportunity to tell your story and show them the good things that you're doing. Because, you know, what hit me, this point on empathizing, you know, everybody's come with them saying, I need more, and my stuff is the most important, and everybody's sandbagging along the way. So the CFO or whoever is responsible for this has to sort all this stuff out. And what I wanted to do is help them as straightforward and, you know, as cleanly and clearly, transparently as possible, let them know kind of what was going on in our area. I think it makes their job easier. Again, it goes back to credibility. You know, if you gain credibility, you got a lot of credibility going into this. If you're working on your credibility, this helps with credibility because they get to hear the story. It hit me one day. It's like, there's no way that my CFO should be able to know what I'm doing all the time. And I don't mean detailed level and stuff like that, but it's my responsibility to help him understand that as well at a level that he can make decisions. So challenge and assume constraints. Again, you know, I think one of the learnings was that, you know, I need money. No, that doesn't necessarily mean no. It may mean that I just haven't communicated effectively. So I go back and think about, okay, how do I need to say this differently, because I truly didn't believe that I had effectively communicated the message. Be creative. You know, you might think about agreeing a base budget, but then ask that question, can we come back to you if we run into a high value opportunity for approval outside the budget cycle? So it's not unusual for a budget direction to be take your budget down 10%. So, you know, that's kind of saying I don't care about your story, but I would still tell a story. And then I would always ask this question, okay, if we got a really good payback on it, come back and have some further dialogue around it. And then, you know, when, again, I don't know, I probably shouldn't have put if in here. It's when the world changes again, you keep talking about it, keep discussing the impact, what's needed, what's the impact on your metrics, and the budget. You know, it needs to be dynamic. If it's not going to be, you're going to have to give up something, and helping them make those choices, I think, is important. And then finally, you know, all of this, meeting expectations, and again, back to the point of establishing credibility as you work through all this stuff. So, and I put down here again, you know, I want to share, obviously, this valuable, the name of the book and stuff for your reference. And with that, you know, I hope this has been interesting. Again, I grew up technical, decided to go the way of you know, some of you guys, and as I got deeper and deeper into it, I saw that there were things that were so much more valuable and powerful than just understanding the tax technical piece, and it became a passion of mine, and I really appreciate having an opportunity to share it with you, and absolutely happy to follow up in any way if you want. There we go, Shannon.
So if anybody has any follow-up questions, please feel free to address those to Tim or the group or each other. I would just totally support Tim's journey as he moved from intuitively and naturally being good on the strategic side. I've known him for almost 25 years now, and he was always naturally good at the strategic side of the fence, both on the management side and on the technical side too. In more recent years, as he said, I've firmly watched him develop a much better appreciation for the operational side and the major impact it has on tax department performance and shareholder value and risk mitigation. It's one of the attributes that we look for when we're evaluating tax leaders for our clients. The maturing of the balance between those two management styles, strategic and operational, and the key to get in the door is always the technical competency. That's just a given in this day and age. But he's absolutely correct. The more progressive, the more dynamic companies have come to a realization of the balance between strategic and operational management, how important it is in developing teams and people and addressing those issues. So I especially was happy that Tim discussed that. And as I said, I think any of you guys should tap into his knowledge on the process planning side. It's a gold mine for you guys to take advantage of. So does anybody have any other follow-up questions they'd like to cover with Tim?
Hey, this is Christine Witt. I just had one question. As you made this transition or sort of recognized this this hole on the operational side, did you find any particular tools that were really helpful for you as you sort of developed that?
I would say that I think that this model, the situational leadership 2 model, and there's different models out there. So again, you might explore this, but having sort of a model that provided a framework to think about was very helpful. And I'm going to be honest, I retired, before I saw this through to what I would have liked to see in completion. This was a tough thing for me to sort of let go. But, I would say finding a model, a framework that gives you sort of some parameters to work with and communicate from, it can be very helpful.
Tim, can you explain what that model is, a little more detail, the situational 2 that you're referring to?
Yeah, it's basically, really what it is, it's that bicycle. That bicycle example that I just went through is an example of situational leadership 2. And basically what you're trying to do is understanding a person's development, where they're at in their development with respect to any given task, and then matching your leadership style with that development level based on where they're at. So, we sort of had a little bit of a joke that we didn't even have 1 through 4. We had 0. And that was, well, if it's not working, I'll just take it back and do it myself. So the point is, not micromanaging, not throwing them out there to wolves saying, I've given you a new task, delegate. I'm going to delegate the whole thing to you. Hope everything works out. Good luck. And finding based on conversations back and forth where they're at in their development and matching your management or whoever's management style to it. Is that helpful? Is that helping get to the clarity on it?
Yeah, I think it's helpful. I think where I struggle a little bit with understanding how you maybe operationalize some of the things that you're managing versus the individual and people, because that, to me, the bicycle model is a really great model when you're looking at how does this one person, how do you look at your staff? I'm just thinking more in terms of, modeling the whole, maybe this operational leadership on a higher level, not just individual by individual. And maybe I'm trying to get to something that isn't there because it's all about individual to individual. So I may not be, clearly, I guess, asking the question, but.
Yeah, maybe just a comment, and I view the work that we did, and I'm truly not a process geek. I love solving problems and things like that, but the process has saved me, and that's not an overstatement. But maybe to your point, I view the work that we did from a process standpoint and this work from a sort of a leadership training standpoint. We're related to the situational leadership too, which we did with the Blanchard Group and stuff like that. I see these things fitting completely together, and that may get to, those kind of concepts married together may get to, your kind of broader, what's my strategy with respect to operational leadership. And I'd be happy to go into this more, if you want at a different time or something like that too.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Tim, Jason Helsing again. I did just want to say, thanks, and if you don't mind, I will follow up with you. Actually, just super brief, I was in a tax department that we actually, in Boise, Idaho, that we ended up building up to about 20 international people, and my boss kind of let me experiment, I guess, so to speak, and we went through all kinds of, having to train them up ourselves, and we've learned, the hard way a lot of the stuff you're talking about, and I wouldn't mind just comparing notes later on. So.
I would had a great boss, huh?
Yeah. Thank you.
And this is Tony. I would encourage everybody to use the forum too to have some of these discussions so that we can, number one, share some of this knowledge information across the group as a whole, but also to get some other people's input and input in there as well, as I think the synergism from the group is going to work out quite well if we start utilizing that format a little bit more and not so much one-off and isolated situations when it's appropriate. Obviously there's times you guys want to talk one-on-one. We highly encourage that as well.
Okay.
Again, I know I threw a whole bunch of stuff out there today. I tend to see the world a little bit different than a lot of people, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you guys today.
Tim, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. It was great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, we'll be announcing the date for the next one pretty quickly. Shannon will take care of getting back with everybody on that, and again, refreshing what the topic is and who's going to be presenting on it. So we'll get that out to you guys here in the next week or two.
Yep, and I'll be sending out the recording of this as well with the slide deck with the next day or two.
Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Tim. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.